Now,
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
Well, it is 5:07 on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Making sense of the news. A good Monday morning, a good Labor Day to one and all. I am Andrew Langer in for Larry O'Connor, sitting alongside my good friend Julie Gunlock. Hello, Julie.
Good morning.
It's so good to see you on this
It's great to see you.
holiday morning.
Yeah.
So glad. Anyway, we got a jam-packed show as we always do today. We've got Robert Chernin. He is the creator of Israel Appreciation Day. We have a lot to appreciate in Israel, and so we want to talk to him about that. We've got Alfredo Ortiz from the Job Creators Network. I always love to talk to him about the state of the economy and what's going on with small business. It's Monday, so we're sitting down with Joe DeGeneva, legal analyst, former U.S. attorney to the District of Columbia. I got all kinds of questions for him. Noah Montgomery is running for Ward 7 of the D.C. City Council. He's joining us in the 7 a.m. hour. And then Mark Mix from the National Right to Work Committee and the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. He's going to join us because obviously it's Labor Day, so we got to talk about these kinds of labor issues. And as the show was getting started, literally as we're sitting here doing show prep, I asked the question that I posed to family members over the weekend as I saw family members. Were you aware that Tim Walz had a brother? I had no idea that Tim Walz had. In fact, Julie, what I need to do is I need to text our good friend John Justice, who does radio in the Twin Cities, and ask him if he knew that Tim Walz had a brother, because I think he may have been surprised to learn this. But this is a crazy story, this Tim Walz having a brother.
Yeah, it really is. I didn't know. Everybody is such a mystery. The Harris campaign is a mystery.
Yes.
Her plans for the country. All he does is act like Chris Farley. I know nothing about him.
Yes.
And except that his wife is super creepy, opening the windows so she can smell the city burning, and his uber leftist daughter. But I don't know much about them. And now, it turns out that he has a brother, and relations are not good.
Relations are not good. He hasn't talked to his brother in 8 years. His brother thinks he's unfit for office. I mean, apparently his brother's Facebook feed is just something to behold when you go and talk about this. But Julie, before we go too far down this rabbit hole, because I haven't seen you in a while, and because we didn't talk to you on Friday. I'm assuming at some point in time over the weekend you saw the Notorious interview. What were your impressions? What did you think of
with Tim Walz's brother?
No, the interview on Thursday with
I'm
Kamala
sorry.
Harris.
Oh,
yes, we had one.
Yeah.
We had an interview.
I think my reaction was much like others. It was more outrage at Dana Bash, however you say it. Dana. Anyway, I get that wrong.
I say Dana. Yes.
Dana Bash. And what I found fascinating is, thank God for X and all the great commentators on the X platform, because there were all these videos that went up of her interview with J.D. Vance, and the comparison was stark. It really was great. Look, I'd watched both interviews, and in the back of my mind, I'm watching her lob these softballs at Kamala, and I'm thinking, gosh, this is a very different tone. But then when you go back and watch the interview that she did with J.D. Vance, it really is remarkable. Look, there's not a bigger problem in this country than the press, which is now basically adjuncts of the Democrat Party.
Oh, yes.
That is the major, that to me, most problems stem from that. And this was a perfect example of it.
Well, I mean, we were talking, before we came on the air, we're sort of talking about the way things stand with the election and the polling numbers, and we'll talk probably a little bit about this later on. But this, it's not even just frustration with sort of how the needle is moving. I think the needle is moving in the right direction. I'm not sure if it's moving in the right direction, but this gets into the issue of the but for. I mean, I've talked to Curtis Houck from Newsbusters in the last couple of days. This idea of the 90% relentless coverage. Again, the media not doing its job.
Well, again, and Andrew, getting back to the original issue,
Yes,
we
that's
have
exactly where I was going back to, yeah.
Tim Walz's older brother, who the headline says, and I don't know. Oh, this is John Levine over at New York Post, and he's so great. But you think about the fact that this is being covered by a couple of conservative or people who are considered more on the right, and while the mainstream media totally ignores it. Tim Walz's older brother is 100% opposed to all of his ideology, believes the vice president hopeful is not the type of character who should make decisions about the U.S. future. This was the headline I'm reading from the New York Post, again by John Levine. If this were a Trump, and we've already seen it, there are Trump family members who get major press, major coverage. The minute they come out against Trump, they're splashed all over mainstream headlines. Right. Yet this brother is just memory hold.
It's the day that RFK Jr. turns around and endorses Donald Trump, right? I mean, it's breathless coverage of every one of the various creepy, kooky Kennedy family members. They're turning around, and it is breathless reporting therein. But that's exactly it. I mean, here's the thing: I've done a weekly interview on in Minnesota for the last 10 years. Lots of discussion about the policies of Tim Walz in the last few years. Actually, the policy when Tim Walz was a congressman talking about what he was doing there, and no discussion whatsoever, no understanding that Tim Walz had a brother. He apparently, according to this article, Jeff Walz is the brother's name. They haven't spoken in 8 years. They had no idea their brother was being selected as the vice presidential candidate. It takes Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer takes her going. And he's a registered Republican, by the way. He was a Trump supporter in 2016,
and he donated to the Trump campaign.
Never gave to his brother, which, by the way, is the first test of any candidate. I don't know if I don't know if you've ever had this conversation, but if you're thinking about running for office, especially something like Congress, your campaign consultant, usually what they tell you is go and raise money from family and friends first, because that's the big test. Because if your family's not willing to support your bid for office, maybe, just maybe, you should not think about running. Yes. So, this is. But Jeff Walz told the New York Post on Saturday, "I'm not doing any interviews." He now lives on the Florida Panhandle.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. He lives in Florida. It's hilarious.
Yes, he lives, but he also lives in the most conservative part of Florida. By the way, the Florida Panhandle there. I know that area.
This is, I believe, also California Governor Newsom. His brother lives in Florida. Is it his brother? I think so. His brother lives in Florida, and also supports DeSantis and I think Trump. So it's very clear that these people do not have close-knit families.
Here. Besides Jeff Walz, Tim Walz has a sister, Sandy, who lives in Nebraska, where the Walz clan grew up, and another brother had passed. He was 44. He's much, much younger than all of them. A tree
fell on him.
A tree fell on him
when he
Craig
was Walz, 44.
Wow. This is scary stuff. Anyway, we're going to continue to just a moment on this. But first, it's 5:15.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live
from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
We got some horrible, horrible news over the weekend, Julie. And again, we're going to be joined later on in the show by Robert Chernin from the Israel. He's the creator of Israel Appreciation Day. Sad news over the weekend, as there was a hostage rescue, which would be good, or attempted hostage rescue, but discovered that 6 hostages had been killed by Hamas before they could be rescued. Tragic stuff. Tim Walz, meanwhile, was doing his bit at the Minnesota State Fair.
That's right.
He gets confronted about this. He goes on. He'd gone on this long screed about how the Minnesota State Fair is the best state fair, which was, I believe, a song from the musical State Fair.
He was walking around the state fair trying different types of food and,
of course,
giving these sort of food reviews. And then he comes across 3 reporters The first two questions were softballs. They were equal to the "What's your favorite brand of ice cream?" type questions that Biden gets. But then the third question, and it's important. We're gonna play the cut here, but it's important to know he looked straight at that reporter.
Right.
He heard what she said, because there's some chatter out there saying, "Oh, he didn't hear her," or "Oh, he didn't hear the question." Not true. You can see. So as you're listening to this, know that he looks right at that reporter when she is yelling at him, and she's yelling. She's not confronting him or yelling at him. She's just trying to, just like reporters do when they're trying to get over, speak loud enough for the candidate to hear. So you want to play cut one.
Yeah, let's go and play cut one.
How are you feeling? What's your reaction to the 6 hostages being found dead in Gaza?
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Unbelievable.
I mean, it really is quintessential politician stuff. He'd gone on, because this is a thankfully short clip of Tim Walz, but he had gone on. There are other versions of this clip where he goes on for a minute talking about the state fair food and why the state fair food is so good in Minnesota, blah, 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 like the ultimate kind of a softball thing. And again, this gets into our conversation in the last segment, right, about the interview that Dana Bash did with these guys.
Ready for it. Yeah.
Right. It's they either that they're not ready for it or they just don't want to confront it. I mean, this was the whole thing last week, which is, Dana Bash asked him, at least she started to ask him the question about his military record, didn't ask him anything about his about China, and he gives her these two different answers: the lying about IVF answer and the one about his military service, in which he which he essentially attributed to making a grammar mistake. I mean, this is exactly.
I'm
it.
actually
So
a 6 foot tall, 100-pound supermodel, but I just have a really bad grammar. It's important to know that he looked at the reporter, he heard her question, he then turned. You can see him turn to a staffer, and then he goes, "Okay," and he goes, "Okay, goodbye." So obviously this, he's told don't answer, or he just decides, or he tells that guy, "I'm not going to answer." He then and again, we woke up to this news: 6 dead hostages, one being an American, and I was just gutted. It ruined my day. I felt so sick to my stomach, and I was eager to watch the morning programs to see what the reaction was. And I wanted to watch the news. I wanted to hear about this. This is Tim Walz running around like Chris Farley at the Minnesota State Fair. The thing he posted on X was a review of a pork chop on a stick he was eating. Oh, yes. Okay, so 6 dead hostages, one being an American citizen, has been killed by Hamas, and he is posting about a pork chop on a stick. It is sickening. And by the way,
that's the actual direct question there is to Kamala Harris and Tim Walz is, this is an American citizen who was killed. Why hasn't the Biden administration done more about this? Why have they why has Kamala Harris said she's going to lay up and says she wants a ceasefire agreement at all costs?
Really quickly, I want to play that cut, because know that the news is out. 6 dead hostages. Play cut 2. This is what Tim Walz was busy doing, and this is what he was posting on X after the news had broken that there were 6 dead hostages.
All right, Minnesota, breakfast of champions, pork chop on a stick. I've traveled to a lot of state fairs. While Iowa has a nice one, it does not compare with Minnesota, and the pork chops here, the best.
I've had it too.
I mean, when you wake up to tragic news, maybe don't walk around like a lunatic eating pork chops and posting about it.
He's a man who's got to have his pork chop on a stick there, Julie. He's got to get to the state fair. Listen, we've got so much more to get to. Right now, it's 5:22 here on WMAL.
Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It is 5:37 on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. We are making sense of the news. A good Monday morning to one and all. We got a great show coming up, guys. We got Robert Chernin, the creator of Israel Appreciation Day. He is going to be joining us in the next hour. Alfredo Ortiz from the Job Creators Network as well. Joe DeGeneva, he joins us every Monday morning here on O'Connor and Company. We got all kinds of questions for him. Noah Montgomery is running for the D.C. City Council in Ward 7. Get a chat with him about just what's going on in D.C. And Mark Mix, because it is Labor Day, Julie Gunlock.
That's right.
It wouldn't be Labor Day if we didn't talk about labor issues. We've got Mark Mix joining us. I am Andrew Langer in for Larry O'Connor today, sitting alongside the talented, ever-talented Julie Gunlock. Hello there, Julie.
Well, happy Labor Day.
Happy Labor Day. We're working, and I hope you all are taking a relaxing day. We're so grateful that you're joining us on your Labor Day here. So listen, I don't know what to believe out there. I am dubious about polls, even though it is September. Now is, of course, Julie, it is the first Monday in September. Now we really should be paying attention to the polls. This is where the polls actually start to mean something. Mm-hmm. And this is the funny story. And I know I keep referencing my buddy John Justice, who does radio in the Twin Cities, but I know he would not be surprised at this New York Post story. Tim Walz is actually hurting Kamala Harris in his home state of Minnesota. A new polling of 635 likely voters from Minnesota's KSTP suggests that Tim Walz is actually hurting her. But you know, if I know he doesn't live in Minnesota anymore, but Tim Walz's brother is any indication,
well,
the more you get to know Tim Walz, the more you don't like him.
These people lived under the rule of Tim Walz. He completely destroyed, many cities because of the BLM protests, let them burn. His wife famously saying she opened the windows so that she could smell the burning cities.
Yes.
You had the Minneapolis mayor begging for help. Tim Walz just ignored it. Let the riots go on. Let the burning go on for 2 days. Absolutely cost the city billions, the state billions of dollars. He shut down the state during COVID. He was unsympathetic to citizens who were losing their businesses and their livelihoods. He signed an incredibly invasive bill that would allow the state to take over parental responsibility when it comes to so-called gender-affirming care. He signed an abortion bill that allows abortion up until the time you're giving birth. He is a wild leftist, and he's a radical leftist. And he's an authoritarian. And so people, and of course, Walz, I firmly believe that he was not truly looked at and investigated by the 100%. Harris campaign. And so, of course, he's going to hurt her chances because they've lived with him. They know what's coming.
Well, it gets into what I was talking about in the last segment, right? Again, not to sort of spin back to Tim Walz's brother not supporting this. We all got family members we don't get along with. But this idea of the folks who are supposed to know you best, your family and friends, and remember what this guy, the whole purpose of Tim Walz being selected, or at least the ostensible reason, right? The ostensible reason was because he's supposed to be the Midwestern dad, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. He is the guy who runs on this concept of the neighborliness factor, or at least he's supposedly, we know what that means for him. You know, the bottom line here is that these are the folks who understand him best. They know what he's done there, and they're not happy with him. Harris now leads, according to this Trump, 48-43. This is Minnesota, right? So it's Minnesota. A significant decline for her from the previous survey that showed her up 50% to 40%. So Trump's gaining ground. But this is the damning part of this, Julie Gunlock. Mm-hmm. This poll, like many of the other polls, this poll oversamples Democrats over Republicans, with Democrats making up 40% of the sample, Republicans 35%, and independents the remainder. And so if she is losing ground as they're oversampling their own party, that should be raising alarm bells, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about the coverage, the media coverage, late night comedians, sort of the fawning from pop culture and actors and entertainers, my goodness, if we did have a more balanced press, a more
Right.
balanced, commentary on Kamala. I mean, the idea that they're okay with just having one interview, that there's almost no pressure put on her. The fact that there's no policy prescriptions, no policy ideas on her website. And that seems to be fine with the media. Now, you imagine if we did have a fair and freer media, and thank God for X, because I think a lot of this stuff would be buried. But if we did think about the polling, I mean, it's not just response bias with who's actually doing these polls. It's the fact that almost every single media outlet, except for obviously radio, outlets like ours and also Fox News, are totally carrying her water. So it's just interesting to think of what the polls would look like if people who aren't sort of like obsessed with politics like we are, we're getting the real story.
Well, I always call it the but for. And it gets down to the same thing with the entire Trump presidency, right? Where would Donald Trump have been but for, the relentless negative media coverage, which is now moving to a fever pitch, right? How would he have appeared? What would the Democrats' chances have been? I mean, that is so vitally important here. Listen, we've got so much more to get to. We're going to continue to talk about these polling numbers because Julie raised another really interesting point in all of this, as she always does. Right now, it is 5:44 here on WMAL.
WMAL, making sense of the roads because traffic doesn't always follow the pattern. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
So, yeah, Julie, I mean, I am looking, to me, the poly markets are where we're going here, the betting markets to sort of see what's happening. I think they're a really good indication about this. I find it fascinating that they got no post-convention bounce.
Yeah.
And then, this interview that wasn't really an interview, this infomercial for the Harris-Walz campaign is not helping them. You and I both understand the concept between earned media and unearned media. This was earned media that was certainly unearned, and it certainly produced no benefit for them. At least that's what it looks like to me.
It was a campaign ad, Andrew. It was entirely a campaign ad where she was allowed to lie. One of the most fascinating parts of the Harris interview with Dana Bash. I don't think I'm saying that right. Dana Bash.
Dana.
I'm never going to get it right. I don't care.
That's all right.
She says she reversed herself on EV mandates. She reversed herself on fracking. And then a little bit later, she says, but, one of the things I'm proudest of is the Green New Deal. You can't have the Green New Deal if you are for fracking and against EV mandates. Right. That's the whole thing. And there was no pushback.
Right.
And so, I look at these polls and I think, if someone is sort of they get their news from MSNBC or CNN, they might feel some relief. Then they see, Coach Walz running around with his pork chop and might find that charming. And so, if you're not obsessed with politics or you're not watching it closely, they're doing a very good job of reinventing her. And if you're not thinking critically, I can imagine it works. So it does concern me a great deal, the polls. And I think it's interesting that she didn't get a bump, but I do think that everybody's working overtime trying to remake her into this all-American girl with her all-American sidekick.
Well, listen, and we know that they can still ratchet this campaign up, and I can say this here, if it looks like so here's has been my theory throughout this campaign, because you and I haven't had a chance to chat about this since everything was switched out back in July. Right, they were running on the sugar high. They were running on the sugar high of the announcement. Then they were running on the sugar high of the Tim Walz selection, and then they were running on the sugar high of going into the convention, and hoping that they were going to still have that sugar high coming out of the convention. It looks like that they didn't. Actually, let me come back to something before we get to my theory about all of this. You made an important point in the last segment, which was that they haven't released a policy position paper. Very important, I think, to the general public, certainly important to you and me as policy wonks. And I mean that in the best way. But the reality is, folks, let's underscore this. The week before their convention, Kamala Harris, in one of the rare moments she was talking with the press, she said, I'm going to release my economic plan the following week during the convention. We go through the convention. They release nothing. I mean, they released the DNC platform, which essentially was Biden term 2. That's not the same thing. But Julie is absolutely correct. They have said nothing on the website substantively about policy, nor will they say anything substantive about policy, because they don't want to have a debate on the merits here. And my point in all of this is they're going to run on the sugar high. And if it looks like Kamala Harris is going to lose, listen, it's my theory, and I'm proffering this out there. That's when they pull out the big guns. They pull Joe Biden from the actual presidency, and he resigns, or they 25th Amendment him, and Kamala Harris becomes president. So that now it's not Donald Trump running against Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States. It's Donald Trump running against Kamala Harris, the first female African-American, Asian-American president of the United States, and how dare he try to take that away from her. That's at least my theory that I've been proffering as of late. They can ramp this thing up to 11.
Yeah, it is interesting how you have this narrative out there of Kamala being this strong woman, but she persisted,
Right.
all of this. And then she has to have her emotional support, sidekick
VP.
with her,
Yes.
a man there to mansplain what the policy positions are. And again, this image they're trying to sell of strength, and yet she's too afraid to do an interview. And there was a Politico article talking about how nervous her campaign was about this interview. They're really worried. You imagine the murder boards they were doing, asking her every possible question, which is kind of silly when you consider Bash wasn't going to ask her any tough questions. But if they had watched the Vance interview that Dana Bash did, they might have thought that she was going to get some tough questions, or maybe they thought Dana Bash had a shred of self-respect and was going to try to prove that, oh, no, these conservatives are wrong. I can be fair, right? Of course, that turned out not to be true. But this, again, I can't get over how inconsistent it is, the picture they're painting with this candidate who is hiding both from the media and the voter. And then you see Tim Walz at the state fair, and he's asked one serious question and he turns his back. He wasn't asked multiple serious questions. He wasn't treated disrespectfully. He's asked one question about a horrible tragedy and he turns his back. These are the candidates we're dealing with. Cowards. Absolute cowards.
Governor Walz, what do you make of the fact that your brother is on Facebook saying you're unfit for office? How about you ask him that question, straight on up while he's at the fair and enjoying his pork chops and applesauce? Listen, it's